Alrighty, so we're back to talk about the No Kings protest, so let's just get into it. I saw 2 No Kings protests over the weekend in my local area, which I was not expecting. I did see one in June, but it was like the only one I saw, and it was maybe like 50 to 100 people. This time I saw 2 separate protests about maybe 20 minutes apart if you're driving, and I didn't really go anywhere else, so I don't know how widespread the protesting was just in my city, in my local area. However, I know that there were protests all over the world of people protesting Donald Trump and what his administration is doing. Now, as far as the reactions, a lot of people are basically trolling the people who are protesting because they're saying, hey, this is America. We literally do not have a king. In fact, when we established our government, we rejected the idea of a monarchy and we wanted a democracy instead. So first, I want to start with a speech from Bill Nye, and he's basically talking about what this whole thing is about.
I remember well the Vietnam War. The mall was shoulder to shoulder, much as it is today. Traffic stopped citywide. The protest movement expanded. There were protests around the country, and the war was ended. We are protesting in the same fashion today.
I want to pause it here. One, is interesting that he's speaking behind a bulletproof glass, and that's not something that I really paid attention to prior to what happened to Charlie Kirk, so I don't know if that's a direct reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination, or if this is just something that they would have always done for this type of protest and event. And then also here, he's talking about the Vietnam War, and that's a little bit different because I think back then you could protest things and you were protesting social causes, social issues, and I feel like protests back then were just more meaningful and more effective. And I want to point to the Montgomery bus boycott. And so for 381 days, Black people refused to take the bus, refused to take public transportation, and you can visibly see the effect that that has on the local economy if people are not participating in something that is relying on that money and that revenue in order to make a profit, basically. And so with the No Kings protest, you don't really see a immediate effect the results of the protest, if that makes sense.
Only today, the stakes are higher. Rather than abandoning a war against an elusive, perhaps sometimes imaginary foe, we are confronting the possible end of our republic. We are here to tell our lawmakers that what's going on in our government is wrong. They must stop the abuses of this petulant president and his circle of sycophants. No thrones, no crowns, no kings.
Okay, I want to pause it here because I did not really know much about the No Kings protest, so I didn't know that their full slogan was no thrones, no crowns, no thrones, no kings, whatever he said. So in that context, it makes more sense, but like literally no kings, we don't have a king, so people instantly don't understand what the protest is about. But obviously, kings is symbolic, it's representative of a person who has kind of not complete control, but they have a lot of control to where they can make a difference on how everybody else is living their lives.
This president and his associates cannot tolerate dissent. To them, our free speech is frightening. They are arresting people and denying due process in courts. They've tried to silence television hosts. They're trying to indict civil servants, prosecutors, judges.
I actually want to pause it there because I think he's referring to Jimmy Kimmel. I could be out of a loop on that, but I don't know if it was the government that got him off of air or if it was, because I know that Benny Johnson was kind of leading that, at least from what it seemed like on social media, but I don't know if it was directly anybody who works in the White House who said, hey, get this guy off of air, we can't have him saying whatever. I don't know all of the details on that, so I just find that point interesting.
Even their own cabinet members. But in this land, these sorts of actions are not new. In 1776, our ancestors had had enough. They declared independence from a king by means of a document stored safely right over there on Constitution Avenue in the National Archives.
So what he's doing there is he's making a call back to 1776 when we first said, hey, Britain, the UK, we don't want you controlling us anymore. We're going to do our own thing, basically, right? And so when you bring that situation up, you kind of give people the sense that they're doing the same thing now, and it means the exact same thing as what it did then. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I just find that interesting because you are trying to invoke that kind of national pride in what the country stands for. But then again, going back to what the country stands for, that is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you're talking about. Okay, so let's talk about Trump's reaction. So there's been a lot of AI generated memes of crazy reaction. I've seen one where Trump is on a plane and he's basically dumping poop on people. And then I've seen other ones where he's putting on a crown and then he's putting on whatever the king puts on, that little whatever it is, right? And so obviously they are playing into and playing along with the idea of a king. And so anyway, I don't know if this tweet is real. I couldn't find it on his account, like either on Twitter or Truth Social. A huge thank you to all the No Kings protesters yesterday. I was very concerned a king was trying to take my place, but thanks to your tireless effort, I am still your president. Great job, all. So I just find that funny because I do love a good troll. And what he is saying here is basically there's no king, and if there was a king, it's not me, and you're protecting my place basically by preventing that person from being a king. So anyway, we don't have to read too much into that. It's just a little bit of humor. But I do think that obviously this is a serious conversation and it is worth a deeper discussion. Okay, so now I do have a few interviews or clips that I want to play of people basically criticizing the people who are part of the No Kings protest, and we can start with this one.
So are you accidentally stupid or are you stupid on purpose? Because the only reason you would go to a No Kings protest in 2025 is if you were stupid enough to believe that America had kings, not realizing that your very participation in this event that is not being shut down by the one person who you claim is a king.
Okay, so I want to pause it here because if you're taking this slogan literally, like, hey, there's a king, we have no kings, and then you just basically invalidate the whole thing, I think that that's kind of an iffy thing because symbolically we know what they're trying to say, and so I just want to point that out.
Invalidates the entirety of your argument. See, this is all these people know how to do anymore. All y'all want to do is go out and be part of some protest, right? It doesn't accomplish anything? No, it never does. It makes you feel good for a few hours. Y'all rally around, oh, this is going to be the biggest uprising. What are you going to do? Nothing. You don't have any demands because no kings is already a thing, right? It's called Independence Day. We have one of those already. Oh, you don't celebrate that either, do you? Yep, that tracks. That sounds about right. So anybody who's going out there to be part of this No Kings protest, just know all you're really doing at the end of the day is playing yourself and showing your ignorance. So go ahead, be a part of this No Kings protest if you want to. It's a free country, you can do what you want, but don't be surprised if people are laughing at you for it.
Okay, so that was an interesting take. Now, me personally, I am not someone who's going to protest, who's going to stand outside. I'm just going to make my videos, right? And so that is my form of contributing to the social, political conversation about our society and our country today. However, I do think that there needs to be, I guess, more clarity around what the demands are, because if you are protesting Trump and what he's doing, you need to have something that we can point to and being able to say, hey, these are the results of you guys protesting. So for example, with the bus boycott, people are boycotting buses. What you can see is that nobody, at least nobody black, is riding the buses, and you can visibly see the impact that that had. Whereas with the No Kings protest, you can't really see the impact because one, Trump is not taking it seriously because he's trolling and all of that stuff, right? And so you don't really have anything that you can point to say, hey, this is why this protest is making a difference and this is why it matters. Okay, this other one I want to play because it gave me a huge chuckle just because of the logo that is on the person's poster, so we can just go ahead and play this.
King's Day.
And why specifically are you out supporting No King's Day?
I think protest is important.
Why are you protesting?
How much time do you have?
A couple minutes. And what's the main reason you're out here protesting President Trump?
I agree with a lot of the decisions that are being made.
Is there any decision in particular you disagree with?
Okay, so I would start with, well, I don't even think it's appropriate for me to have this interview.
Okay, so my only problem with that interview is that I think you should protest if there's something that you deeply care about, but you should be prepared at any time to speak about why you're doing something. I feel like that is really important because one, it shows that you're actually committed to the issue. You're not just going out there and basically standing with everyone else because it seems like it's the cool thing to do. And so I can argue on one hand, these people should know what they're talking about and what they are there for and be able to clearly point to different things that they disagree with. However, I can also understand that most of these people are probably not people who get on camera. They're not prepped for interviews and all of that stuff. So it can be nerve-wracking to have a microphone in your face, a camera in your face, and be expected to defend your position on the spot. That is the problem with this. And it could be my algorithm. It could just be showing me stupid interviews that don't really show anything significant. And there could be really good interviews out there where people are arguing their points and they're doing it well. But what I wanted to point to with that particular interview was the logo, the Burger King logo. And so people are just having fun in the comment section and basically saying like, hey, you know, what did Burger King do to you? Why are you protesting Burger King? And obviously I get that it's a play on words, but it's just so funny because literally that does not have anything to do with President Trump, the Burger King logo, and so whatever, but super funny. Okay, so the next one is pretty funny. This is a couple being interviewed and apparently they are not on the same page on what they are protesting, so this should make for an interesting conversation when they get back home.
Do you support the deportation of illegal immigrants?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
Okay. She's saying she doesn't.
If they're illegal, then yeah.
Do you not support the deportation of illegal migrants? And why not? He does and you don't.
It's not illegal.
Okay. If someone crossed over the border illegally, should they be deported?
I'm not too sure about that.
Hope I didn't just ruin their...
Okay, that is super interesting. These are like those street interviews that you see where they interview a couple and they ask them questions about cheating and one of them says something stupid and you're like, what? Why would you say that in front of your partner? It's kind of like that. And I don't know if any of these are skits or if they are real interviews that are happening and people are just fumbling them. But this one was super interesting because it sounds like the girl wants to be at this protest because she thinks that deporting illegal immigrants is illegal. And he's like, hey, no, send them home if they're illegal. And so obviously one person should be at this protest and the other person basically shouldn't be. And so it sounds like he just went there in support of her, not realizing that, hey, you know, we're not on the same page, or they didn't talk about this at all. And so this is super interesting that you would get on camera like this and talk about why you're there, but then also not really be on the same page. And again, I think this goes back to one, it's either a skit, or two, people are just not prepared to come on camera and actually talk about their ideas and their beliefs and what they stand for. And then the other thing I saw was that it was, I guess, some big story that the White House joined Bluesky. I don't really know what Bluesky is, but I've heard of it in relation to the Charlie Kirk assassination. And so basically they released a video. It's basically Trump's greatest hits in his second term. It does look like a pretty cool video based on the video effects, but I'm not sure how people will receive it because they did do some type of ad or like commercial, whatever, for the military that was really inspiring. At least I am someone who loves TV, who watches a lot of TV, and so I am more sensitive to a video that is well done, and it's well done to where it hits on the emotion that is supposed to in order to get a certain reaction out of you. So I can completely understand that, and I can also understand people just not liking this content and thinking it's not funny and all of that stuff. And so all of this is just interesting seeing the reactions on social media. Alrighty, so let's get into what is no king. So basically, again, this is people protesting the fact that Trump is president and they do not like the decisions that his administration is making. And so with people perceiving him to be behaving in unchecked ways, it's really on Congress and the Supreme Court to check him. Now with the Supreme Court, they are really limited in terms of what cases are presented in front of them. So if there's something that Trump does and it doesn't make it to a lawsuit or a court case basically, then there's not really much that the Supreme Court can do about it. So it really depends on private citizens, corporations, that sort of thing, launching a lawsuit and forcing this to go to the Supreme Court, in my opinion. Now, since we're talking about the Supreme Court, I do want to interject Ketanji Brown Jackson here. So for me, I am Black. I do have locks in my hair, and so does Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I know that for a lot of Black women, this was a moment of pride to see a Black woman on the Supreme Court and one who has locks, because locks are perceived as unprofessional even though they're not. And so that was a huge win in terms of seeing someone who looks like a Black person in a position like the Supreme Court. And Ketanji Brown Jackson, in addition to kind of going viral with her whole explanation or non-answer for what a woman is, she has gone viral recently because I guess she made a statement in a court case, and basically she was arguing that Black people are disabled. Now, I am Black and I am actually disabled. I have a hearing loss, and so I can kind of understand and relate to what she's saying, but I think she missed the mark here. So we can actually play the clip and listen to Ketanji Brown Jackson in her own words.
Thinking of it, of the fact that remedial action, absent discriminatory intent, is really not a new idea in the civil rights laws. And my kind of paradigmatic example of this is something like the ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people with disabilities. And so it was discriminatory in effect because these folks were not able to access these buildings. And it didn't matter whether the person who built the building or the person who owned the building intended for them to be exclusionary. That's irrelevant.
I want to pause it here so I can understand what she's saying. People with disabilities, they do not have access to certain buildings, certain environments because of the nature of their disability, and we need to fix that. So she's arguing that Black people do not have access to certain spaces, specifically the voting booth. And so I think you can kind of understand what she's saying, but towards the end, it's not going to make sense, and we can let that play out.
The facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here. The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting system, right? They're disabled. In fact, we use the word disable in Milligan. We say that's a way in which you see that these processes are not equally open.
Okay, so I don't think that this was a good comparison because Black people are not disabled. Like, the fact that you are Black does not make you disabled. You're not mentally disabled if you're Black, and you're not physically disabled just because you are Black. Now, you can be Black and have a disability, but your disability is not tied to the fact that you're Black. However, I can agree with what she was trying to say in the broad sense of Black people not having access to certain spaces. I can agree with what she was trying to argue there, but I don't think that that argument makes sense because in 2025, Black people have access to the same spaces that other people have access to. And so to give an example, I have a hearing loss. I want to go to the movies. I can physically get myself to the movie theater. I can sit down. I can watch the movie. I can hear what's being said, but I probably won't understand 50% of it. So in that sense, the movie theater is not accessible to me. So what they would do is create captioning devices, and I had to use one, and there's a video further back on my channel where I'm basically talking about that, and it was embarrassing because it's like this robotic looking thing that you put in your cup holder, and people were staring at me, didn't know what it was, and it was my first time using it, whatever, right? And so that makes the movie theater accessible to me. I can physically get there, I can watch the movie, I can read the machine. That makes everything a little bit better. Now, I've never used that machine again after that, but the point being is that that makes the movie more accessible to me. The movie that was the most accessible to me without me having to use something external was the movie Creed 3, which was subtitled because the daughter, Donnie's daughter in Creed is deaf. She uses sign language, and so that made sense for them to have subtitles. And I know people don't like subtitles because it ruins how the video looks, whatever, right? And so anyway, there's not a similar comparison that you can give for Black people when it comes to voting. So I voted in New York City and also North Carolina. In North Carolina, there were 2 voting places near me. It was very easy to get to them. There were no lines, all of that stuff, right? And I didn't have to take that much time off from work. In New York City, I lived in the Bronx, and there was one place in my neighborhood. It was an old clothing store that was converted into the voting center for maybe the 2020 election. I'm not 100% sure. And the line was around the block. So people were waiting in line for probably about 3 to 4 hours, if not longer, just to be able to vote. And that is a long time to take off of work. That is a long time to be standing in line. And New York is crazy because there's not public bathrooms everywhere. Like usually you have to buy something. You can't just walk in to use the bathroom basically, right? And so that's what I always hated about New York. That situation I described is not unique to Black people. Everybody who lives in the Bronx in my neighborhood would have experienced that issue. There were white people there were Black people, there were Indian people, there were Muslim people, other people were there besides Black people, right? And so we were all dealing with the same issue. So in that sense, it's not fair to say, hey, Black people have to wait in line because there's only one center here and blah, 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 right? It impacts so many more people. I don't know if in a non-urban city environment, so like a small city that's predominantly Black or minority, I don't know if there's only one voting center for the whole city and you just have to figure it out, or if it's multiple voting centers and then you just deal with whatever comes, and then that's the case for everyone, right? And so I just don't see what she's arguing here being a valid argument, because the situations that she's describing, in my opinion, they're not race-based, because everyone needs a driver's license. Most people, if you don't live within walking distance, you need a car, so you shouldn't live somewhere where you need a car but you don't have one. And in certain situations, you can't control that, whatever, but that's not what we're speaking about. And then also, I just don't see anything here that is really limiting Black people and preventing them from being able to vote. Now, if you have financial situations and you just don't have the money to renew your driver's license or whatever, right, I can see why that would be a problem, but that's not unique to you being Black. That's just unique to you having money problems, and everyone has money problems at some point. And so, long story short, I don't necessarily agree with the comparison to saying that Black people are disabled, because they're not. Black people are not mentally or physically disabled just because they are Black. Alrighty, so getting back to the No Kings protest, sorry for going off on a tangent there. So the first No Kings protest that I know of was in June 14th of 2025, and I did see one in my local area, and I didn't travel around my local area to see if there were others, but where I had to go, there was a protest on the way there, and it was pretty small. It was about 50 to 100 people, and so this time around on October 18th, I saw 2 different protests because I went to basically 2 parts of the city in my local area. And so again, they were about 20 minutes apart, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. I saw people parking their cars and then getting out to join the protest. They were stopped near kind of like a major stoplight area, so there was a good bit of traffic. And so the spot that they picked was a pretty good spot. You had no choice but to notice them, and there a lot of cars that would go up and down that highway that they were at, and so they picked a good spot. Now I want to get into the slogan. So let's talk about the slogan. So no thrones, no crowns, no king. And we don't have a king in America, so this really just invokes Game of Thrones, The Last Kingdom, and I find that interesting because what it makes me think of is the British royal family, and I used to be kind of obsessed with them, especially after everything that happened with Princess Diana, and then her sons were really young and they were just everywhere, right? And so when you think about the British royal family, what they say is that they don't really have any real power. They're more of just a figurehead and a representation of the UK government. And so I find that super interesting, because if you are protesting king in the current society, that is what you are protesting. You are protesting a figurehead that doesn't really do anything, even though they're super famous and they're well known. Whereas an American president has a lot of power. As the president or the leader of the free world, of the leader of democracy everywhere, the American president has a lot of executive power, and that in a sense is more kind of threatening than a king overseas who really doesn't have any real power or any direct influence on Americans. So I just find it interesting that they're using no king when that kind of references an outdated system of government that is not reflecting what we're dealing with in our current society. So I think that the slogan "No Tyrants" would have been more digestible and quickly and easily understood for what people were trying to argue, which is that they don't like that Trump is in power and he's able to make all of these decisions that seem like they're unchecked and no one can really stop him from doing whatever he wants, basically. Now, the other alternative slogan that came up for me was "Power to the People." That obviously doesn't work because the majority of people voted for Trump to be the president in 2024. So you can't really argue that you don't have any power if the majority, again, voted for Donald Trump. And so the issue is not the people are powerless, is that once someone gets in power, because again, you can have a democratically elected president who wreaks havoc on people even though he's duly elected for the presidency. And so I just find that interesting because obviously, not to make a Hitler comparison, but Hitler was voted into power basically, and we see how that turned out. And so what is interesting here is that you can't argue that the people are powerless because the people put Donald Trump into the presidency. They made him our president for the next 4 years. And so again, this just goes back to the idea you can protest Trump being president, but that needs to lead to something tangible, something that people can see and point to your protest being a success. Because really, the only thing that's going to show that your protest is a success is him being impeached, and you need legal things to happen in order for that to happen, right? And so either Congress checks him or the Supreme Court checks him. Now, in terms of people protesting, so if I were protesting Donald Trump in 2025 because I do not like what he's doing, there are 3 things that I would be protesting. 1, no financial aid to foreign governments. America needs to be America first. We need to make sure that people can buy things in America, they can pay their bills, and our children have a future. The next generation has a future. ICE. Now, this is a big one for me because I don't know how I feel about people being deported if they are illegals. I think there's a certain way that you should do that. I do not agree with people wearing masks in order to arrest people or detain people so that they can be deported. And the reason why I say that is because I am hearing impaired, and COVID was awful for me with everyone wearing masks. I could not understand people, and in a general sense, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but 50% of what people I'm not familiar with say to me, I have no idea what they're saying. And when you put a mask on top of that, that just makes it even worse. And so I actually hated going out in public and having to interact with people who had a mask, because at that point, nobody wanted to take their mask off. They want to protect themselves, right? And so that makes sense. I completely get that. But that was a horrible experience for me because it made communication very difficult. So if in 2025, for whatever reason, for no reason, if somebody tried to come up and detain me, and this is like a government official, a federal official, whatever, and they have a mask on, I'm going to think that you're a criminal, because only criminals wear masks to rob or kill or assault people, right? And so that does not give a good impression when you see someone aggressively approaching you and they have a mask on, right? And so you think of the mob, you think of criminals, and that's not a situation that you want to be in. And so I would be very terrified if that happened to me, because imagine ICE giving commands, not that ICE has any reason to come after me, but in this scenario, imagine ICE coming after me, they're shouting stuff, I have no idea what they're saying, and obviously I'm going to kind of like put my hands up, I'm not going to understand any command, and because of the fact that I'm not doing whatever they say to do, that could get me kind of in a compromising position, right? And so I don't like anybody else experiencing that, not that everyone has a hearing problem, but I just think it's better for everyone if nobody has a mask on, they identify themselves, and they do the job that they were hired to do. Now, I also don't think that that means that people should be targeting these people who are just doing their job. Like, you shouldn't be threatening these people, making it difficult and all of that stuff, because I saw a wild video earlier, if I can find it, I'll add it on the the screen. But basically there was this cop who was trying to, I guess, arrest 2 black people, but they were just beating him up and he was not winning at all. This was going to be a very difficult arrest. They were fighting near a street and a bunch of cars were driving by, and eventually like 2 or 3 cars stopped and like maybe 3 white men got out to help the police officer make the arrest. And so you see the police officer basically tasing somebody or using the little stun gun, whatever, on them, and the guy just falling on the floor. And it was pretty wild to see a police officer getting beat up like that, basically, and then having civilians come in and help. And so I just don't think that should be happening. Like, I would never, if someone that I knew was being arrested, I would never like interject and like physically touch people. I might be yelling in the back or whatever. I might not even say anything, right? But I just don't think that people should be fighting back. Like, there's a way that you handle yourself when you're in a situation like that so that it doesn't escalate and then you don't bring danger on yourself and on that other person. Like, just let people do their jobs, and if you need to complain about something, then complain about it, but do it in a respectful way that doesn't endanger your life and the lives of other people. So if you lost track of what point 2 was, point 2 is that people who work for ICE, they should have to identify themselves when they are detaining people to deport them. And then the third thing is wars. America, we should not be involved in wars that do not benefit us and where we are not defending a direct interest of Americans. Now, next I want to move on to this whole idea of Trump just kind of doing whatever he wants. And so what I want to point to is basically the fact that the left has been winning the culture war for the last 20 years. They've controlled culture in general, pop culture, Hollywood, the COVID pandemic, and so there are a lot of things that they have had control over socially to where they decide what's socially acceptable. They also decide how you can be punished socially if you do not go along with whatever the mainstream narrative or opinion is. And so I don't know if it's that Trump is kind of responding to that and he's overcorrecting for it, or if he truly is just in a completely different game to where he is a fascist and he is doing all of this stuff that he shouldn't be if he wants to be the leader that people elected him to be, which is that you put America first and that you treat everybody like they are American. You don't just think about white people, you think about black people, brown people, Asian people, Hispanic people, black people, Indian people, and all of the other races, right? And so I think that is important that you have a president who cares about everyone and not just a small group of people or a certain group of people, if that makes sense. And this was something that I had to do research on because I was really trying to understand why people think that Trump is a fascist, because from what I was reading, they were saying that basically other types of political leaders can embody those traits that are associated with fascism, but it just looks a little bit different or it's not completely fascist. And so I just find it interesting how people are making those comparisons or making those statements about Trump. One thing that came up in my research was that you can basically make people do what you want them to do through coercion by punishing them, using the law and all of that stuff to get the result that you want, or you can reward people without using laws and your power, right? It's kind of more informal. And so what I want to point to is the example of critical race theory. And so we know that Trump, I don't know if he's passed a law saying that you can't teach CRT in the school system, but basically I think he threatened to pull funding from schools that were teaching that. And so obviously that's him using his power as a president to enforce his will on other people and to get certain actions or to make sure that certain things are happening or aren't happening. On the other hand, what he can do without using his power is that he can positively reward schools that aren't teaching CRT. So he could set up like a nonprofit that other people are funding, and that is private money that goes to schools that are teaching or promoting whatever things Trump thinks that they should be teaching in the school system. So that's two different ways to go about getting whatever it is that you want to achieve. One is through punishment and the other is through rewards. And so I don't know if that's something that Trump needs to change in order to be seen in a more positive light by a majority of Americans, not just his party and the MAGA movement, but Americans at large. Because I know some people or a lot of people agree with what Trump is doing. They love it. They don't see the issue with it. And then other people are really horrified by what they're seeing. And sometimes it's really hard to figure out where I fall, especially because I spend so much time watching TV and I do love the trolling aspect of what Trump does. And I understand that's probably bad in certain situations when you have him trolling like that, but I really do think of things in terms of TV shows and movies, not to say that I don't live in the real world, but that's just how I think about things. And so it's interesting from an entertainment perspective to see all of this craziness happening in social media, but also on the flip side, when I go into the real world, I can see that things aren't really quite reflected how they are as drastically as they are on social media. And so that's just interesting. And so I think my point with this is, how do you make the next 4 years or the next 3 years really, how do you make that better so that Americans are generally happy with what Trump is doing and where the country is going? And how do you do that in a way where you avoid punishing people and you reward them for the behavior? So you're not taking away from other people in order to get what you want, but you are giving to other people. That is a really weird way to say that, but whatever. And alrighty, so those are my thoughts on the No Kings protest. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this video, what you think about the No Kings protest, what you think about the reactions you've seen on social media. If there's anything that I got wrong in this video, definitely let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.